You know, when you put an event together like this and some of the big names start to roll in, it's really, for me, it's very rewarding. When I saw Mercedes-Benz come in, I won't tell you that I don't drive a Mercedes, but I would if I could. So we'll try to make this bigger next year. How many Mercedes drivers out there? Anyone? Oh, we got a few, handful. Okay, there you go, there you go. Awesome. Okay. So our next speaker's John Kelvie. He's the founder and CEO of Bespoken. Yep, and he's working with Mercedes-Benz, and so they're going to co-present. And representing Mercedes is Robert Bruchhardt. Thank you. Yes, German pronunciation. I told them we wouldn't talk about the World Cup, okay? Don't talk about the World Cup. Sorry. Let's give it up for, oops, just lost my thing. Sorry. John and Robert. John and Robert. Sorry, just lost my notes. Let's get it up for John and Robert.
All right, so welcome everybody to our presentation of a small case study we did. By us, I mean us as Mercedes, and Bespoken is one of Peruvian startups. We work together with regards to testing and especially test automation and continuous integration and continuous delivery when it comes to voice applications. Maybe a first introduction from my side. So my name is Robert. I've been with Mercedes now for more than 4 years, working previously in Stuttgart, so in Germany from our headquarters. And I was basically working with them since version 1 of our connected cars. So the first cars which really have a SIM card in them, so you can do remote commands and car-to-car communications and stuff like that. And since a little more than a year now, I moved to the Bay Area, so next to San Francisco, to work for our research and development outpost there, and basically connecting upcoming technology with our Mercedes-Benz cars. And of course, this is why we're all here, right? One of the biggest upcoming or already technologies which are already here is voice. So I'm working in a team which integrates voice and speech technology with our Mercedes-Benz cars. And then presenting today with John.
Yes, it's great to be here. I'm John Kelvie. I'm the CEO of Bespoken. We build testing and monitoring tools for voice apps. We have actually been doing that practically since the start of Alexa, and prior to that, I was actually building my own speech recognition engine. And the amazing thing about it that we've learned is that even when we were building our own speech recognition engine, we were probably spending 5% of our time actually building it and coding it, and 95% of our time testing it. And so now that we're focused on the Alexa and the Google Assistant platform, we've really dedicated all our time to testing and monitoring and ensuring that these voice applications work perfectly. And we're really just pleased to be working with Mercedes. What we put together here, I think at the start of the project, I told Robert that we would build together the state-of-the-art of test automation. I do think we've done that for the voice industry, and we're very proud to talk about it today.
Cool. So maybe first of all, since not that many hands went up when it was being asked that if you guys are driving a Mercedes currently, first of all, let me explain what is Mercedes Me, and then especially what is Mercedes Me Connect. So Mercedes Me is actually our service brand for Mercedes-Benz. So it's not only evolving around your actual car, but also about services we offer. Most of you guys are probably familiar with Car2Go, or maybe a few of you are familiar with My Taxi. So we are also offering a wide range of services related to automotive, but also to transportation in general. And this is all under the umbrella Mercedes Me. And then one of the biggest portions of this brand is also called Mercedes Me Connect. And this is basically our connected car solution. So the way you have to think about that basically is you have a Mercedes-Benz car on the left here, or which could be any car you're buying right now from a dealer. And like I said before, it currently comes, or all of these cars are coming with a SIM card. So it's more or less like a mobile phone already connected to the cloud. And by the cloud, I mean a very secured backend system made by us, hosted by us. And this connected car backend system basically gives access to an API. And this API can, of course, be accessed by multiple front ends, right? So what we currently offer is a web front end, as well as multiple native apps, for example, an iOS app or an Android app. So you can actually stay in touch with your car and issue some remote commands. And then, of course, one of the newer front-end technologies now, and this is how I also like to think about all these voice technologies, it's basically just another front-end, just another way to interact with existing solutions out there, is of course, as we can see in the picture, for example, Google Home, or your Google Assistant from your mobile phone, or an Amazon Alexa as it sits there on a chair. Kind of hard to see, black on black, but yeah, so. But one thing first, before we come to this Alexa and Google Assistant solution, is that within Mercedes, we're trying to differentiate right now between our voice solution, which we have outside of the car, and inside the car. So inside the car, we actually introduced our newest system at this year's CES in Las Vegas. It's called Mercedes-Benz User Experience and comes with our A-Class, actually, which is kind of a very nice shift within our company. I mean, if you think back, all the newest technology basically was always been introduced with the higher classes like an E-Class or an S-Class. But our newest system, which is this Mercedes-Benz user experience system, comes with a touchscreen, comes with a voice assistant, is actually being introduced now in our A-Class. So in our cheapest model, which is pretty cool because we are currently, or we're clearly aiming now for a younger customer sector. And one amazing thing in this piece is that we actually introduced our own voice assistant, working together with Nuance. And you can trigger it with our own trigger words, so you don't say Alexa or Hey Google, you say Hey Mercedes. And then most of you guys probably tried some voice systems already in the car, and most of you probably wouldn't be that satisfied. But with this system now, you can really do natural language commands. You can do stuff like, hey Mercedes, I'm cold. And then it will turn on the heat or turn up the heat. Or you can do stuff like, hey Mercedes, I want to visit my brother. And it would navigate to your brother, knowing where your brother is if you sync your contacts and stuff like that. So it's really a shift inside the car. From these old systems. I mean, going back, also Mercedes was one of the first, or it was the first car manufacturer introducing a voice assistant inside the car called Linguatronic in 1996. And now seeing this whole evolution also inside the car, being overtaken in the meantime by home appliances or mobile phones like Apple Siri, Amazon Alexa, and so on. Now coming back inside a car with a very nice solution, it's a very cool step. But like I said, this is inside the car, one thing, but outside of the car, of course, it doesn't make sense to introduce our own solution, right? Because most of you already have solutions in place. You either have an assistant on your phone, or you have an Alexa at your home, or a Google Home at your home, and so on. So there we decided we want to integrate with existing ecosystems. So you can actually trigger and remote control your Mercedes with, for example, your Google Home, or your smartwatch, or your Alexa-enabled TV, or your phone. And for example, also at this year's CES, I saw some Google Assistant-empowered fridges, so you can actually talk to your fridge to lock your car, which is kind of crazy in my opinion, but it works. So maybe to be a little more specific, this is not something which is just a theory or something. It's already out there. So if you right now buy a Mercedes or you drive one, like a few of you do, and it's one of the newer models which is connected, you can actually get the skill from the Amazon store, you can get the actions from Google to remote control your car. And to make it more specific, I want to demonstrate like 3 main use cases, and I hope that the Wi-Fi connection here is strong enough, because I brought a little echo spot. So maybe imagine you're waking up in the morning, it's pretty cold outside, and you want to drive in like 15 minutes to some place. So all you need to do basically is you could be even under your shower, it doesn't matter, or dressing up, and you can do Alexa, ask Mercedes to turn on the AC.
Are you sure you want to start the auxiliary heating?
Yes.
Okay. Start auxiliary heat request is now sent to your E350.
So by the time I arrive at my car, I don't need to scrap off ice or anything, right? And of course, this also would be possible through a web UI or a native app. But I mean, it takes time and it takes my hands to get this thing, to power up the app, to click a button, and so on. So this is a lot easier. And also other use cases are evolving around this. So imagine you're coming home and you think, oh, did I forget to lock my car? So instead of going all the way back to your car to actually check, or getting your mobile phone out to check on the app, you can just do, Alexa, ask Mercedes to lock my car.
All right. Lock request sent to your E350.
And that's basically it. And then we offer, of course, a few other use cases. You can ask for your remaining range, or for the car's position if someone else was driving your car before yourself, and stuff like that. So these are basically the use cases. And I think it really makes sense. I mean, I'm using it myself. I'm driving a C-Class. I'm using it myself on a day-to-day basis. So every morning, I basically turn on the engine to precondition the car. And this really works well. So, but of course, it also introduces some challenges, right? So you want to make sure that this is working consistently on production. If you introduce new features, you want to make sure that your regression, meaning all the use cases before, are still working the same way they used to work. And this you also want to ensure for multiple markets. As I said, right now we are live for only German and English basically, but we are rolling out for further markets. So the way you actually have to imagine this is what you would do if you want to test all this manually. You would get some people in different quiet rooms sitting in front of Alexa devices, right? Talking to them over and over again, which of course is a very tedious work. It's error prone because of course you would get bored by this tedious task. So we were thinking, hey, how can we automate this? And what levels of automation are there? And coming from software development within a web and native context, how can we set up a continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline? And then this is where we actually stumbled across Bespoken, and John will give you a short introduction what they offer for this.
Yeah. So there's a number of considerations when you're thinking about testing and automation for voice. Some of the essential things that you need to be thinking about, on the left-hand side over there, you see this evolving organism. Well, what that represents is the constant evolution that happens with artificial intelligence. So one thing that's a big sea change with these new types of systems is you're actually building on top of an AI operating system. And building on top of that, it's great. It has machine learning built in. It's evolving. It's getting better. But that change, that also introduces some unpredictability, some dynamism, and testing to ensure that your application performance is consistent is really critical. So it's something you really need to be thinking about. In addition, working across different languages and locales, this is never an easy thing for software developers. But when voice is your primary interface, it becomes that much more challenging. You know, the scenario that Robert was mentioning of having testers, you know, multiple different testers in their own room talking to Alexa, even if you have a dedicated QA department that can do that, do you have testers that can speak Italian? Can they speak Japanese? Can they speak Spanish? That's a very hard thing to QA. And then if you talk about the different accents, the different locales, different environments, there's a lot of challenges with dealing with that internationalization in the environment. And that's a special thing with voice that you really need to make sure to get right. And then lastly, we have this sort of room, this crowd of different providers. We are at the moment, and Mercedes as well, currently focused on Alexa and Google, but Facebook is supposedly coming out with a device. There's obviously Siri, which is quite popular. Microsoft Cortana is out there. Having a consistent experience across these platforms is also very important for one's users. And so then how do you actually address this? Well, so we offer unit testing, end-to-end testing, and monitoring. And why would you want to use all these things? Well, what we like to say, and why we're showing a picture of Iron Man here, is that testing and automation are a superpower. So something that is very commonly talked about within software development is 10x developers. Some people sort of argue that 10x developer is a myth. Other people think that they're sort of the holy grail that you should try to find for your organization. Well, our argument and thesis as a company is that 10x development is about not having developers who are suddenly much smarter or much more knowledgeable. Instead, it is about taking advantage of tools. And it's taking advantage of tools specifically around automation as they're developing. So I like Iron Man, but we specifically chose this image because Tony Stark is not someone with innate superpowers. He is using tools, his Iron Man suit, to achieve all these great things. We believe the same thing can be done by using testing and automation and monitoring. And so what are these superpowers that you can gain? Well, one of the first ones is SuperSpeed. So if you're thinking about on the development side, you can leverage what we do with unit testing to do everything locally on your laptop, no deployments, no dependencies, just running directly, testing your code. You can use that so that you're saving time on doing deployments, which that's going to make you a lot faster. You can work through 10 different issues or 10 different scenarios in the time it takes you to do one deployment. If you're talking about on the QA side, someone who is sitting in a room manually interacting with a device, that is very slow. So instead, to leverage automated test scripts, that person can save themselves an immense amount of time and really spend time instead on edge cases and exploratory testing, which is really a very vital thing. Hyper precision is another great asset that you can get by using automation. So what this means is that you can work through complex or even mildly complicated sequences in particular states to get to a particular issue. So if you're trying to figure out what's going wrong with your app in a particular language, in a particular account linking scenario, you can set up your whole sequence as a script. It'll run through it very fast, very reliably, allow you to quickly identify where the issue is and fix it. I don't want to make too bold of claims, but I really think if you're using these sorts of tools, people, if they're working locally on their laptops as opposed to doing all sorts of deployment cycles, you can take development times where fixing an issue might take you a day down to an hour or even 10 minutes. So it's really helpful to be able to sort of jump right to the spot where a problem is. So bulletproof, this one is sort of implied in everything that we're talking about with testing, but by leveraging automated testing tools, it's going to make your application much stronger, much more industrial strength, much more resilient to any sort of error. All-seeing, it's not actually going to make you all-seeing, but you're going to have a lot more visibility into your application by using this. If you use unit testing tools, you can easily tie it into code coverage. You can easily tie it into continuous deployment. That's going to give you a lot more insight into what's happening with your code. There's a huge ecosystem that's really supportive around that that you can then tap into and is really going to make all your stuff work better. And then lastly, all understanding. The challenges of working across languages and locales, you really cannot overstate that. As you see people like Mercedes that are rolling out globally, to work across all those different languages, to deal with different idioms, to deal with different accents, it's very challenging from a QA perspective. I think people are just starting to sort of come alive to where the challenges are there. And so having a solution that allows you to automate those scenarios and quickly run through them and ensure that your app is working correctly on a global basis is really an immense benefit. And it's another superpower that we offer there. And I sort of mentioned these things, but these are what we offer, the automated unit testing. That's for the local testing, and it's really ensuring your code is working correctly. The end-to-end testing, that's actually going to make sure that your whole system and your speech recognition and NLU is working correctly, and we do some neat stuff for that. And then the last piece, which I haven't touched upon much, the continuous testing, we leverage the same approach, but we then do it on a regular basis. And so we're monitoring your skill or your action to make sure that it's always working right, and we'll notify you if there's any problems at all. So it becomes a really virtuous cycle, covers every step of the way for people that are building tools for Alexa and Google. And so with that, we want to talk about how we applied these things with Mercedes.
So yeah, how can you apply this healthy cake we saw before actually to a use case, yeah, and the use case you've seen before. And but maybe to start off, because I'm not sure how many people are really familiar with developing skills or actions on Google, let's maybe start off first with the basic architecture, right? So what happens actually when a user talks to an Alexa device? So let's stay, for this example, in the lock car command. So we have the customer speaking to his Alexa device, issuing a command like ask Mercedes to lock my car, like I did before, right? So what happens really in the back end is the following. The device is streaming this audio data basically to the Alexa service, right? And then in the Alexa service, using this phrase ask Mercedes, Amazon actually knows, okay, I need to address this to the Mercedes skill, right? And within the skill manifest, you're basically defining which endpoint do you want to hit or which microservice is the right one to move forward. The NLU, which is provided by Amazon in this case, will identify this as a lock car request. It's a pretty simple request. So it will redirect this lock car request to our Mercedes Me microservice. And then from this microservice, we are coming back basically to the picture I was showing in the beginning. This is going to our connected car API because we know which endpoint to hit for that and which car the customer owns. And then from the connected car API to the actual vehicle. So this is basically the whole chain. And now thinking about, okay, how can you actually do automated testing? And I think the most interesting one of all these things within that cake is actually the real end-to-end test, right? The thing where you normally would use a normal human being sitting in a quiet room and talking to the device. We want to automate that. So what we need to do actually is, of course, we need the device, right? But then again, if you have the real actual hardware device, you need some kind of voice output, some kind of voice input. And this makes it difficult. So using the bespoken tools, the solution actually is simulate the device, yeah? Have a virtual device within your actual computer. And this could be anything. This could be a server. This could be a build server, like in our case, yeah, which is running somewhere or even in the cloud. And using this virtual Alexa or the virtual Google Assistant, you can then write test cases. And for that, we actually with John together, we choose a nice format which can also be understood by non-technical people and non-programmers. So you can actually give the task to QA teams, for example, who are not familiar with writing JavaScript or Python, right? And then all they need to do basically is define test cases. So they write this utterance I was doing before, and they expect a specific result. In this case, they expect that the lock command has been sent if I say, ask Mercedes to lock my car. So then we need some kind of engine from this to kind of take the text, transfer to audio, and stream that audio to the Alexa cloud. And for example, Amazon Polly can be used in the case of the bespoken tools to kind of translate the actual utterance to speech and voice. And then this voice gets streamed to the Alexa service with our skill inside there. Then the whole chain happens, which we saw before, right? So hopefully this intent got recognized right. And if this has been the case, we will get back another audio stream. In this case, say, all right, lock command sent to your whatever it is, in our case an S-class. And then all we need to do is basically take this audio, transfer it back to text, and then compare the expected against the actual result. And this is, if this is fitting, like in this example, everything is fine, right? And this can be run on a day-to-day basis or on nightlies, let's say, on different environments, right? In different languages. And this is the beauty of it, it's scalable, yeah? And basically, if you come up with a new feature, it's very easy to test regression, and then you also add some test cases on top of it, and then it's also easy to test this new feature without any manual work included, and like I said, runnable on a nightly basis. And of course, from there, we took it to a whole CIACD pipeline, which John is going to explain a little more.
Yeah. I think there's a laser pointer here. Let me see if I can use that. It's not really showing up on the screen there. Well, so we came up with this fun illustration to show how we put this all together for Mercedes. And so if you start on the lower left there, you see the developers. They're in Developer Valley. That could be Silicon Valley, where Mercedes R&D is. And they're working on their laptop, they're coding, and they're running unit tests. And you run those unit tests just as you're developing, and it's actually going to be very helpful for accelerating your development, for debugging as you're going through. Really useful stuff there. Once they're done doing that initial development, they're pushing code to Bitbucket, which is a source code control tool. And so that means that they've finished a unit of work, they push it out there. Those unit tests are run again in a clean environment. So it ensures that, okay, common scenario, even if you're not a developer, if you've worked anywhere around programmers, you'll hear them say, oh, well, it worked on my laptop, right? Well, this ensures that it works on something other than just their laptop, which is a very useful thing. So once it's inside Bitbucket and it's being unit tested there, if it's on a special branch, something that that's been approved by a manager like Robert for testing, once it's been approved for that, those unit tests are run again. In addition, then a deployment happens. And we leverage things like the Ask CLI to do that. So it's automatically pushed out to the cloud. Your interaction model is updated with Alexa. And it's all ready to be run there. And then at that point, we can actually run those end-to-end tests that Robert was just describing. And so we run that on an automatic basis. It goes through all these different scenarios, and if there's any problems, people are notified. The QA team is notified, the dev team is notified. From there, if everything looks, then there's a manual testing phase with the QA folks. If everything is working correctly, then you do a promotion into production. And so once things are pulled into the master branch, at that point there's another deployment, more end-to-end tests. You're going to know immediately if there are any issues. And so this is a nearly completely automated workflow. I don't know many other people that are doing this for voice. It provides really assurance at every stage that things are working correctly. And after it's live, there's even the additional assurance that we're on a 30-minute basis running through simple scripts to ensure that it's working correctly. And also on a nightly basis doing complete regression testing, which is inoculating the apps against any problems around changes in speech recognition behavior, changes with anything else in the environment. So it's really an exhaustive, comprehensive system for automation that I think helps Mercedes ensure that the quality is just excellent. And with that, we did the live demo already with the Alexa, and we also wanted to do another demo for you guys to just show you how these tools actually work. And so I'm going to go over here. And of course, we could have done this in a canned way, but it's so much more fun to do it live, right? It creates a sense of excitement about whether or not it's actually going to work. But first of all, we've been talking about these test scripts, right? And so what really is an automated test? So this is one right here. This is probably about as simple as you get. Hopefully you guys can read this. Let me just, that should make it a bit more readable. But so you say, open Mercedes me. That's what you want, what you're emulating a speaker saying to the device. And then this is the response that you're expecting from it. And the Open Mercedes Me is turned into audio, sent to Alexa, sent to the skill, response comes back, it's turned back into text, and you check to see that then, okay, did it match this response? And you can include this whole test scripting, you can actually do very thorough tests. You can cover lots of scenarios. Like one example of a feature that's included here is that you can use wildcards. So for example, one of the things that comes back is it'll say the name of the car. That's not something that's necessarily pertinent to the test, so we just use a wildcard for what the name is. So these are two simple tests. If I go ahead over here, I can just
You can also zoom in a little.
Oh. So now to actually run it, this is just running it on an ad hoc basis. I'm just on the command line here. I type in the command BST test, and I said just this one script. We have a lot of scripts, a lot of test cases. I'm not going to bore you guys running the entirety of it. But so we run just this subset, and it's actually now interacting with Alexa. And it actually goes about as fast as if we were talking to Alexa. So you're not going to see it, it took 37 seconds to run. Don't think that this doesn't scale. The individual interactions, we can't make them go faster, but we can set up the equivalent of hundreds or thousands of people if we wanted to, all in basically their own virtual room. So you can scale this and run many, many tests very quickly just by having many virtual devices. So I ran this. The response that comes back is that everything ran correctly. That's great, right? I see these check marks. So that says that it worked correctly. That's great. To show you guys some of the additional features that you have here. So the voice ID, this actually allows you to choose what the speaker is. And so as Robert mentioned, we're using Poly for that. I don't have that page open. But there's a whole variety of voices that are provided by Poly. You can use every language that's supported by both Amazon and Google. You can also get different accents, all just by adjusting what that voice ID is. So very helpful there. You can specify what your locale is. Again, that's going to allow you to test across all these different localities and languages. Very helpful thing there. I'm not going to go into all the detail of what we're doing here, but there's a lot of configuration options that you can set up and that you can tune this for your particular environment. One thing I'll just mention here is you can set up several different virtual devices. And so that's how, the sort of scalability that I was mentioning, that's how you can achieve that, so that you're essentially emulating many speakers in many different rooms talking at the same time, which is a neat thing. Now, to show you some of our tests that are for a different language. So here it is written, the same test in German. It's testing, we have these broken down by the different intents that we're testing. The ones that we're testing in German, it's basically testing the same functionality, but going through and using this different language to do it. And you can see also that in this particular scenario here, the first scenario I show you is just like what was said and what came back. What was the response. But you can go beyond that. You can really check everything about what's happening with the skill. You can look at what the card is. You can look at display information. You can include all of that in your tests. And so let me run that one. So I'm going to run the remote lock tests in German here. And this one will take a little bit longer because there's more interactions. And I can tell you also the result here is that it's going to not work. We have some failures that I actually built into the test. And this just shows you how it'll highlight anything that went wrong, any problems as you're going through this. Now, as we mentioned, we have hooked this all into an automation suite. So there's QA people that are running this, just running it themselves on an ad hoc basis to test different scenarios, but it's just as easily tied in to an automation system where it's being run on a routine basis and automatically based on things that are happening within the system. And that's actually very easy to configure. Yeah, so this ran through, and the actual response, Robert would have to correct me on it, but I believe what it's saying, I unlinked the account here, so it's saying, oh, it was expecting a certain response, and instead it said, the account's not linked. So there's an error for you.
Actually got to the wrong intent here. Completely did some smart home stuff. But they tried to find a smart home device.
Ah, okay.
But
so that's actually a problem with the test, not the skill, but we would need to fix the test then, which is pretty easily done. So another thing I want to show you, this was, I think, one of the most fun parts about what we did together is that the Ask Mercedes functionality was something that was added. It was during the time that we were actually working together. And most of the stuff that we've talked about is around the command and control scenarios. Unlock the car, turn on the heating, start the engine. That's really useful stuff. We think that those sort of interactions are it's such a great application of voice. But in addition to that, there's this great Ask Mercedes feature. And with Ask Mercedes, it's a voice owner's manual, right? And it's not command and control. There's a lot of features in cars. A lot more probably than I realized, right? And so with Ask Mercedes, you can inquire about all those different features. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, whoever was maybe also in yesterday's panel regarding transportation, there we also talked about multiple use cases around automotive and transportation you could think about. And one of these use cases which, in my opinion, is especially important in the future, going to more and more ride-sharing or car-sharing approaches, is that a user knows immediately how to control their car. So what we're working on with Mercedes right now is to get rid or away from this huge user manual thing which no one really reads anyhow, right? And going to a voice-based approach. So if let's say I rent a car through Turo, for example, which is a private car rental company, right? The first thing I could do, if this is a Mercedes, I can get inside and ask, how do I do that? Or how do I turn on the windscreen wipers in this car? Or anything like that. And if you think about that every automotive brand will do this one day, actually for you as a user, it's much easier to handle the differences of all these cars, right? And currently, our first approach is actually to kind of offer this functionality from an Alexa device. So if you have an Alexa device right now in the UK, you can actually ask for multiple things on how to operate your Mercedes-Benz vehicle, and really using natural and everyday language. Something like, for example, I could do, how can I drive more sporty? And then she will explain our dynamic select feature, which allows you to set different driving modes, which influences the engine and the suspension and the steering wheel. And these are great examples because there are a lot of utterances there, there's a lot of content here. And if you really want to test regression on these things, it basically means having a person, again, sitting in a room for a whole day asking all these questions. And I mean, I don't know if you see the line numbers here, right? But we are already at, what is it here, 1,800? And this is like the real test case. And so what we can do now is we can trigger it via Jenkins, or one of our QA guys can just trigger it, test something else in the meantime, or get a coffee or whatever, and then comes back and look at the result and know exactly what fails and what not. And this is especially amazing if you train very complex NLU models and more complex interaction models, because if you add another intent, it could influence the recognition of other intents as well, right? And maybe one thing, of course, I also want to extend, this is not solving everything, right? You still need to do some explorative testing. You still need to get multiple people involved, because here what you would do is you focus mostly on one utterance per intent, right? Or maybe on a few, but you will never cover the whole range. So it doesn't really get rid of the explorative testing and stuff like that. So you still need to do some manual part, but this repetitive things like these tedious tasks which you need to do over and over again on a daily basis, this is actually what has been solved using this tool chain.
Yeah, and so it is, as you see here, there are hundreds of test cases that are being run. It is just the combination, the command and control, and then a more open-ended natural language model that you have with the Ask Mercedes features. It's a challenge, and I think, I'm not going to claim that we have the total answers in terms of how to test that. It's been great working together to come up with a solution to test those two pieces together and to make it work. And it doesn't all work. The speech recognition does not always work perfectly. We ran into some really interesting scenarios as we were going through it, things that it doesn't necessarily recognize correctly. And there's different techniques for triaging that, for fixing it, and ways that you work around it. And we're working to put together those best practices for how you solve those problems. It's an interesting area, and just a point I would want people to take away from this is we're just really getting into this. I mean, we are now building apps on an AI operating system, and that is a big change. And the implications of that, the techniques for working with it, it's fun. It's fun for us. I think it's a lot of fun for Mercedes to be on the cutting edge around coming up with solutions to solve those problems and to deliver great experiences. And so just a couple other things we're going to show here. I mentioned continuous integration. We're using Jenkins in this case. I'm not going to show you guys the actual Jenkins configuration that we had with Mercedes, but just to show you an example of what continuous integration, continuous delivery is. This is a skill that we set up. It's just an open source. It's a pretty simple skill. But it's meant to just show you how easy it is to run or to set up this sort of automation. And so here we're leveraging the Ask CLI as well as our tools and code coverage tools to bring this all together. And so there's some installation setup, and then based on what the environment is, it does different things. In this case, if it's just something that's happening in the development phase, then it's just running unit tests. That's what's happening here. If it's something that's production, it actually deploys out to the production environment, and then it runs the end-to-end tests. And this is a real working, complete automation model. There's no challenge to setting it up, but if you put all this stuff together, you have a really great system, and you have something that really removes errors and ensures basically constantly that things are working right. This is actually Circle, which is being used here to run these scripts and the actual tests. And then lastly, this is CodeCov, which shows you your code coverage. This is an example of what I was talking about with the insight and having a real view into what's happening. It's very easy once you've set up some unit tests and end-to-end tests to then configure your code coverage. And that's going to really give you an idea about your quality over time. Not everybody uses code coverage. What I'd like you to take from this presentation is just that if you spend a little bit of time to set up your unit testing, you'll have all these other benefits because you can configure these other things very easily. There's this huge ecosystem that's basically there to help you once you do a little bit of that work up front. So it's really a great thing. Yeah, and so with that, we just wanted to wrap up. We wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us, and really just throw it open. If people have questions for us, we'd be happy to talk about anything.
So as far as the voice testing that you're running, is there a library of commands that you have, or is it generated on the fly?
No, it's set up based on your particular voice app. So, if you think about the testing that you do manually, instead of saying it, type it out. And then that's how you set up your test scripts.
Another question over there, right? Yeah.
Just kind of curious, you said you run those E2E tests nightly. About how long does that take for all of them? Just out of curiosity.
I mean, it depends on how much utterances you actually put in there, right? So you can actually make it as long as you want. Right now, we put it down, I think, to a little more like 30 minutes per environment. And then we have multiple environments, right, like dev, integration, pre-production, and production. And they basically all run in a cycle between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. or something. And each of them takes like 30 minutes.
Real quick, so how many, in your case, utterances do you have? You say it takes about 30 minutes. How many different pieces does it run through in that 30 minutes?
So we
head.
have like, momentarily we have like 14 intents, and then the Ask Mercedes where we also do a quick test. So I would say around 80 or 90.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. Thanks.
Anyone else? Some questions? All right. Cool.
Really appreciate that. Thank you so much.